Good afternoon. Niemen Hao. All right, here we go again. On to our journey in 13 segments. This is week 5, and it's going to be segment 10 and 11. All righty, okay. So here's the overview again of the first 7 that we combed through in the first weeks, and then the next ones. So you have an image of where we are coming from and where we are headed. So these are the ones that we covered. Again, starting from a critique of learning in general terms, moving to identity of students, institutions, and of learners, students is the same, institutions, and of teachers. Yeah, those 3 players in the realm of education. Of course, there are other players as well, like the public opinion, and that's also is something that is supposed to change. So we combed through this a little bit and developed a couple of alternatives, and then turned to the processes that we have to focus more on how we teach, how we learn, and in what kind of conditions, rather than what, the content. Okay, not forgetting the content, not leaving it behind, but integrating it into a different way, into a different concept of making sense of the 3 main players of learning. And that's where I slowly turned to qualitative and to narrative, trying to use those as examples, as exemplars of ways of learning that have inbuilt some challenges to learners, to teachers as well, and sometimes even to institutions. So that's where we covered qualitative and narrative. What is it good for, and how does it fit into these general renovations, innovations of learning, in particular higher learning. And last week I presented a little bit of a case for qualitative inquiry, observing. And this week we'll turn to examples of narrative inquiry, narrative analysis. And again, to flesh out a little bit what deep learning can mean, what situated learning in the classroom can mean, and how we work toward a specific domain in terms of what students acquire that they can transfer into other domains. Yeah, something that is domain general. All right, so this is what we covered in the last 9 segments. So today, narrative inquiry, segment 10. Okay, let's move there. So, narrative. The first project today that I want to focus on is how we get learners to work with verbal data. Verbal data, last segment, the previous segment, I focused on how we work with observational data, with visual data, data that students have access to when they observe people in their natural habitat, with all its problems of subjectivity and objectivity in it. So moving to working with verbal data, in particular narrative data, again, it is an exercise in how students become interested in the lived experience of others, in how others make sense of their lives, of who they are, present a sense of self, juggle or navigate their identity. And in a way, this is an exercise then from simple listening that we do when we listen to people to working with what it is that they are talking about, how they're talking, and ultimately taking that back home into their own questioning and learning lesson about themselves. So this is what we are trying to get involved with today in more detail. And again, trying to relate this to real world exercises. So how can we link the classroom to what people do in their real habitats, in their everyday world and everyday behavior? Trying to connect what we can see to what we have learned, what we read, and in that be innovative, find out something that is potentially new, that we didn't know before, or that we didn't look at in the way we looked at it before. So that's what is the challenge. And now what I would like to work with you is an exercise that I use in class, and that is some interview data. Interview data by the interviewer Bob Woodruff, and you will see him in a second, who interviewed John Edwards in 2008. And he interviewed John Edwards because John Edwards has asked Bob Woodruff, who is a well-known anchor person, I think even, of ABC, and he had asked him to come down to North Carolina and conduct this interview. And why? Because John Edwards, who was, maybe still is, a politician, had done something that is a little bit stupid because he had an affair with another person, a female. He was at that time married, and even worse, his wife was suffering from cancer. So this affair became public, and now he had to do what people in American English call damage control. Yeah, he had to do something. He had to go public and say, look, and that's exactly what we will hear in a second. Yeah, and this is why he called ABC, one of the major networks in the United States, and said, look, I want to go public. I want to talk about this, and the people should hear it from me and not from other sources. So he wanted to be in control. Okay, so that's the situation. And of course, at that time, this was a major thing in the news, in a lot of other shows subsequently, and a lot of people looked at it, and among them, I did. So this is publicly available data, yeah, that learners can look at, and they can go onto the net and check it out themselves. Here is one slide, I think it is from segment 6, that relates back to identity, and that there are 3 components that are really relevant when people talk about themselves. One is how they manage being an agent in it, yeah, or being the recipient. If I'm agentively involved, then I bear some responsibility for my actions. If I was a bystander, or if actions came to me, then it's not necessarily my fault, okay? The issue of responsibility and blame is an issue when it comes to agency. Then, am I the same as you, or am I different? And we had heard already, you can play both tunes, both sides, depending on. And that's what we will look at as well. And then, have I changed, or am I the same from yesterday, a year ago, 10 years ago, from when I was a little boy, or when you were a little girl? Yes, and yes, we have changed, and well, we are still also the same. Again, we can focus on one or the other more. So these are the 3 components I want to look at in more detail and see how John Edwards manages, navigates, balances, yeah, juggles these dilemmatic points. Here he is, and we'll listen to him first, and then we'll look at him in more detail. And again, I would like you to keep 2 things in mind. One is those 3 identity dilemmas, and the other is look also how he delivers whatever it is that he says. Yeah, when he leans backwards and expresses disalignment or disaffiliation, when he leans forward, when he smiles, yeah, and expresses an affiliation with what he says. All these things go together. Of course, also in line with the intonation. Yeah? But we can't look at everything, so we are only looking at a few little components. So this is the first thing, and I just want to go briefly through what I do in class with my learners. This is at the very beginning of the clip that I will show, where he leans forward, open expression, yeah, and he says, can I explain to you what happened? Yeah, can I explain to you what happened in that voice, in that visual portrayal? This is a little while later. People were telling me he's such a great person, talking about himself, that people were telling him that he was a great person. But look at his face, moving back, yeah, his body moving back, signaling a clear disalignment. Yeah, this is not really what necessarily is true, yeah, or I'm not behind these statements. So he is disaffiliating himself with these statements. Now, in contrast to this, in line 36, nothing could be further from the truth. Again, bodily leaning in, and we would interpret this as a smile. And a smile is typically expressing some form of comfort, some form of an alignment, yeah, with something that he agrees with. Yeah, you don't agree with by leaning back and having a facial expression that expresses disalignment. Okay, the smile actually became a matter of discontent with a couple of people. I don't have the time to go into it, but the same night, people argued, how can he smile? You know, in a situation where he is admitting that he is an adulterer, that he had done something pretty bad. Toward the end of the clip, yeah, again, there is in line 50, I never would have done this. Yeah, moving back, disaligning, and toward the very end where he argues that he is exactly the same person. He is in alignment, he is in affiliation with himself. Yeah, being the same person he used to be. All right, so, wait, where's the clip? Here we go. I wanted to show it to you after I went through the...
How could you have done this?
Can I explain to you what happened? First of all, it happened during a period after she was in remission from cancer. There's no excuse in any possible way for what happened. This is what happened. I grew up as a small town boy in North Carolina. You know, came from nothing, worked very hard, dreamed that I'd be able to do something hopeful and helpful to other people with my life. I became a lawyer. Through a lot of work and success, I got some acclaim as a lawyer. People were telling me, oh, he's such a great person, such a great lawyer, such a talent. You're going to go, no telling what you'll do. And this was when I was 31 years old. Then I went from being a young senator to being considered for vice president, running for president, being a vice presidential candidate, and becoming a national public figure. All of which fed a self-focus, an egotism, a narcissism that leads you to believe that you can do whatever you want. You're invincible, and there will be no consequences.
So you're
nothing could be further from the truth.
So you're some.
And the important thing is, could I ever get to that place, and allow myself to let that happen? And I believe the reason it happened is because I had gone through this long process where I became, at least on the outside, something different than that young boy who grew up in a small town in North Carolina. And because that young boy would never have done this, never thought about doing it, to his family or to his wife. I am no different than the person they knew. I am at my core exactly the same person.
All right, so that was the clip I wanted to show you and the facial expressions. So let's work a little bit now with the actual wording, the word choice, and also a couple of changes here that are, I think, very interesting. So the interviewer, Bob Woodruff, asks, how could you have done this? And the turn in which Edward's response is, can I explain to you what happened? three small things here. He wants to explain. Then he wants to explain what happened. And he asks this as a question. So he was asked a question, and he asks a question back. So these are three things that are standing out, because usually if you are asked a question, the response has to be an answer. But what is it if a question is answered with a question? Okay, it can be interpreted as trying to be polite. Now, it can be interpreted as wanting the floor for something more. And he wants to give an explanation. What does it mean to give an explanation? He doesn't say, let me tell the story of what happened. He says, I want to explain. Explain in English has more of a scientific touch. It lays out. It is rational. Stories can be, but they don't necessarily have to be rational. In stories, we can mix in some fictional elements, but an explanation is rational. Anyone can usually follow. This is also where he aligns himself already with an audience. Anyone who is rational can follow this, and we'll see how. What is the difference between how could you have done this and let me explain to you what happened? He doesn't say, let me explain to you what I have done. What happened? What happened is a downgrading in agency. Things happen to us, like thunderstorms or hot, humid weather in Guangzhou, typically. Yeah, they happen. We have no effect on it. We can't change this. But certain things that we have an effect on, we can change, are under our agency. So if he changes it from this is what I have done to this is what happened, he puts himself into a scenario of happenings, of things that went on, where he got involved somehow. Do you sense the difference between I did it, this is what happened to me, kind of like, yeah, the direction of fit. And then he repeats this in line 3. It happened. Yeah, what is it? It's becoming a kind of anonymous, complex. And then in line 6, he says, now, this is what happened. Now let's see, what is happening? He turns to a narrative. In line 7, he says, I grew up as a small town boy in North Carolina, came from nothing, worked very hard, and dreamed that I'd be able to do something hopeful and helpful to other people in my life. I became a lawyer. So he tells a story. Yeah, he goes back into his youth. He says, let me tell you what happened. I grew up. So let me tell you what happened. And everybody's expecting, oh, now he's telling us what really happened. He's talking about his childhood. So is he evading the topic? Maybe, maybe not. So what is he doing here? He grew up as a small town boy. Well, most of the learners in my classes, they don't grow up as small town children, and not all of them grow up as boys, but it resonates. It resonates. I mean, this is us. Yeah, in America, possibly a lot more than in other nations. Everybody resonates with Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, small boys growing up in a rural community, being poor, coming from nothing, and working very hard and becoming a millionaire. That's the dream. Right? That's the image that is being alluded to. And whether or not we actually have gone through this, we align with this. So all of a sudden, he has us in his grip. Yeah? And not just boys, and not just those people from small towns, but everybody is identifying with this type of image. Okay? Working very hard, agency. He is high up. He has a plan. He wants to change the world. I always tease my students at my university in the United States because their motto is changing the world. Yeah? So every young person would like to change the world. This is the dream of an American kid in particular. That's what he is appealing to. So he is aligning himself really neatly, nicely with us, yeah, as young people in particular, but ideas that we all share, that we have. All right, so how does he continue? With a lot of work, he got acclaim as a lawyer. Yeah, and the people were telling him, he is such a great person, such a great lawyer. So what is happening here with the agency? He is moving himself out of subject position. Yeah, I worked very hard, to people in subject position, others who make him into a great person. And remember, that's where his face disaligns himself with basically this image that people give him. Yeah, and then let me just move quickly also. There's a small difference now. He is not aligning the people and himself in the same way as he used to do this before. Yeah, these people did things to him that he may not have wanted. And this actually results then in them feeding him. Yeah, ultimately he is fed. Fed, this is where the agency is totally gone. When you are fed, you are like a baby, a helpless person who only can swallow. You don't take the spoon to feed yourself. You are fed by others. Yeah? So you see that the agency changes from high agency to mid to totally low agency. Yeah? In terms of alignment with others, very few only in the United States at least were running for vice president, being a senator, being a presidential candidate. This is where he clearly shows that he is different. He has to show that as a politician, he stands out and is different from you, me, and basically almost everybody else in this world. So again, this juggling, this navigation of how am I different, how am I the same? So what was he fed with? With egotism, with narcissism. And here he changes the pronoun. That leads you to believe that you can do whatever you want to. You are invincible. Who is you? Yeah, it's in linguistics we differentiate between the inclusive you and the exclusive you. Yeah, when I say Niemann, how Niemann, you is you, not me. Hopefully, then I would say, so how are we today? In English, you can do this. Yeah, and that means you and me. But here, that leads you to believe is you and me. It's an inclusive us. Yeah, but he says you, not us, and not me. Yeah, it led him to believe that he could do whatever he wanted to do. Yeah, he was fed with narcissism and egotism. So this is a very interesting, nice, small move. By changing the pronoun, he again seems to align himself, yeah, with you. In other words, this could happen to you as well, that you grow up with high agency as a good girl, and then you become fed by other people with a lot of bad things, and then ultimately you believe you can do whatever you want to. Okay? An alignment, an affiliation with others as, look, this can happen to you. This happens to anyone. And here he appeals to a picture of a celebrity. Yeah, a celebrity who was spilled into this wave of popularity and then was fed with these negative values. So at that point then he says, nothing could be further from the truth. Yeah. So this is where his smile now shows some disalignment with what happened to him. Yeah. He said, you believe this, but don't be deceived. Yeah. It doesn't go away. Nothing could be further from the truth. All right. This smile, if we have the moment, we can get back to. Because then he continues and he says, the important thing is how I could ever get to the place, to that place, small self-correction. Why does he change from the place to that place? And we know the difference between the and that is one of distancing. That is there, this is here. The is neutral, but he wants to distance himself from that place. Yeah, he is not there anymore. basically. That's where I was when I had my affair. Now I'm back to being a good guy. We'll get there. Yeah. So next one, to that place, and allow myself to let that happen. And I believe the reason it happened, again, we have the happening. He doesn't say, I allowed myself to do this. Yeah, and the reason I did it, no, it happened. But what is this phrase, to allow yourself to let something happen? Who is the person who allows, and who is there's no such word in English, the allowee, the one who is allowed to? So it looks like he splits himself up as the allower and the allowee. Yeah, but he is not schizophrenic. But it is an interesting phrase that often is used in those situations. Yeah, I allowed myself to let that happen. Yeah, I shouldn't have if I had been in rational control. All right, then he appeals to this long process in which or where I became, at least at the outside, somebody different. Yeah, so there is change. Remember the identity dilemma of change, juggling change. He has changed. But he argues here only at the outside. All right? So now, when it comes to the outside, at the very end, he argues that I'm at the core exactly the same person. So how does he manage to argue that I have changed, I became bad, but I'm still the same? Remember, is he the same as when he was a little boy, or has he changed? He appeals to an image that is very, very Western, at least originally, I think. That we have an inner self, a core self, which is the true self, and that's the individual self. Yeah, and then we have the self that others can see, our communal self, our social self. This even is, as a theoretical split, has gone into the social sciences, into psychology and sociology, where people follow this type of split. So his argument, if you want to call it, is pretty clever. He says, look, in my core, and you can't see my core, I am the same good little boy. No change. But in what you can see, yeah, the visible outside stuff, you saw a little bit of this bad stuff, and that is only due to the fact that other people fed me with all these negative values, right? And I had to eat them because my agency was gone. Yeah, I was not able to stop it. Yeah, so this is the argument, rhetorically, very nicely, in my opinion, delivered. Whether it is believable or not is a totally different question. Yeah, but in a way of how he manages and navigates these kinds of three dilemmatic spaces, namely agency and passivity, sameness and difference, yeah, between himself and others, and the constancy change dilemma. Yeah. So these are the three that in this particular segment here that I've shown and worked with, and I just scratched the surface. We could spend a lot more time on this little segment. This is what I've started with and what I wanted to show you, because that is the kind of exercise that I did or do typically in class in order to prepare the learners to work on their own verbal data. And we'll get to that in a little while. So what we have here are these dimensions of identity where storytelling, talking about myself, talking about others, lining them up with each other, bringing in my navigation, is the space where issues of others and also issues of my own interpretation can be tested out. And that is exactly, I think, where students can engage in projects connecting, like in this segment, which is happening in the real world, brought into the classroom, analyzed in the classroom, where we can connect what people actually say and do, which is often at least slightly different from what people actually do say, the kind of behavior they display in experimental settings. This leads to these kinds of exercises, hopefully lead learners to get more connected and also navigate the kind of uncertainties in these interpretive exercises that we just practiced for ourselves. So I'm summarizing a little bit here what learners get, hopefully, potentially out of these kinds of exercises. The first one is that they gain some competence in working with verbal data, with real verbal data, what people really say, and not what is in a book or textbook. Then narrowing the focus from globally understanding of what's going on to a more fine-grained microscopic view of looking at the differences between the and that. Because those things often stand out and we move over them. We understand, but we don't quite have the means typically to narrow it and focus on these kinds of little micro cues, we call them. So this is where learners also can and should develop their own habits of doing interpretive work, making projects their own, giving them their signature, and reflecting on their own interpretive work, and by doing so, reflecting on their own categories, and ultimately navigating the fine line and the problems surrounding objectivity and subjectivity. This is the end of segment 10, so we have a little while to ask a couple questions.